Greetings, my dear colleagues, participants, friends, and a very, very warm welcome from a very rainy Turin for this fourth webinar of the webinar series that we have been running and participating in together, which is focused on the formalization of the informal economy. It is our absolute pleasure to have all of you here, and I see a number of colleagues still joining, and therefore we would just give a few more minutes for them to join. I will take this time to remind all of you about a few routine administrative matters that by now have become standard for all of us, given the fact that for each one of us, this is probably the 5,000th Zoom webinar that we are participating in. And but nevertheless would take this few minutes that we have to remind all of you of what we are going to do today, as well as how you can listen to to this conversation in the language of your preference. So a gentle reminder to all of you that each of these webinars are recorded, including this one, in the 3 languages along with interpretation. Therefore, you will have the opportunity to have access to these webinars on the course page on eCampus, but at the same time, you will also have the opportunity to access this for those of you who do not have access to Vimeo and others on southsouthpoint.net, which I request Anita to please kindly post the website address once again for ease of reference for our colleagues in the chat box. This webinars should become available by the end of today, which is in about 5 hours time once the webinar ends, so which is 6 p.m. Central Europe earlier time, latest, if not earlier. And also a reminder that these webinars are also available on the course web page, which many of you, if not all of you, that would be able to you would be able to access them. Also a gentle reminder to all of you that you are able to access the interpretation of this entire webinar. You can choose the language. Today the interpretation, like in this entire series, is being provided in Russian, English, and Chinese. Simultaneous interpretation is available in these languages, and you can choose the language of your preference by clicking the globe icon at the bottom. Last but not the least, a gentle reminder, of course, to everyone that you would the success of this webinar series depends on your participation, and this is a knowledge series, and therefore while there are interventions which are designed primarily as a way to kick off a conversation, and the success of this entire webinar series depends on your own participation, on your own ability to bring in good practices, your own ability to share with the larger group the practices, the good practices, and the practices that not necessarily have worked into the discussions, so that we can all learn from each other. Today, we are going to, over the next 90 minutes, we are going to have 4 or maybe 5 key interventions. The first one would be by Julia, our colleague Julia Surina, who would provide a very brief summary of the webinar 1, 2, and 3. And of course, an overall review of the this knowledge series itself, of which this is the 4th webinar of the 7 that we will have. This will be followed by a quick update or a quick presentation on the paper that was written by Professor Santosh Mehrotra on formalization BRICS countries, which will be presented on the recommendations themselves. Then, which will be followed by Elena Zotova, who would recall the key aspects of the BRICS labor and employment ministers meeting that took place in Delhi in July this year under the India presidency of BRICS, and will also be therefore then providing the relay to the Chinese colleagues for the Chinese presidency that will be the case in 2022, which is about in a month's time. And this will be followed by group work. I will invite Anita at that particular point in time to tell us about the group work and how that will take place later. And last but not the least, I will then we will invite a very brief 1 minute or 2 minute presentation from each language group to come in and tell us a little bit about what they discussed in the groups. We hope to achieve all this in 90 minutes, and I have already spoken for 7 minutes. I was supposed to speak for 5. As a South Asian, as an Indian, I think I have to admit that being short and brief is not one of my strengths. And unfortunately, I fall in that trap every time. So without further taking more time, I am launching us, welcoming all of you once again for this 4th webinar of the series, and inviting Julia Surina from the ILO Moscow office, but also from the Pardev office of the ILO Geneva to take us through to the summary of the first 3 webinars. Julia, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Nihal, and good morning, good afternoon, dear colleagues. Happy to see all of you again. So my name is Julia Surina. I work for the ILO headquarters, and together with my colleagues, took part in the preparation of this series of webinars for you. We are in the middle of our journey and CIS BRICS exchange on informality. And we thought that this is a good moment to remind and briefly summarize the findings and discussions held during the webinar 1, 2, and 3 for those who were not able to attend them or those who would like to refresh. We were delighted to have a number of high-level speakers who reiterated the importance of BRICS CIS exchange, especially in the times of continuously growing inequality. By the way, inequalities between and within countries, their economic and social implications, as well as drivers and suggested actions are on the agenda of the International Labour Conference this year. And just 2 figures across the world, 2 billion workers, representing 61% of the world's employed population are in informal employment. So reducing informality is often a prerequisite for lowering inequality. I will not go deeper into inequalities because you have heard a little bit about in the previous webinars, but also you are always welcome to read the reports prepared for this year ILC, where you can find a lot of information, a lot of statistical data, as well as information linked to inequalities, informality, social protection, wages, and other linked areas. You all know better than me that formalization of the economy is a complex and long-term process that requires collaboration between the tripartite constituents. In addition to different challenges facing the informal sector, the COVID-19 pandemic has profoundly affected the world of work. The call for action on a human-centered recovery adopted by the ILO constituents also this year is a sign of the urge for more solidarity, which also coincides with the solidarity-driven mandate of the South-South and Triangular Cooperation. And this is the umbrella under which we are meeting here these days for the series of these webinars. In the recently released 8th edition of the ILO Monitor on COVID and the World of Work, the ILO warned on stagnated global labor market recovery and significant disparities between advanced and developing economies. Employment impact of the pandemic is worse than it was initially expected. And I also encourage all of you to have a look at this already 8th edition of the ILO Monitor, which is available in many languages, including in Russian language. CIS tripartite constituents in cooperation with the ILO prioritize formalization in a number of currently implemented initiatives and projects. We have heard about it during the webinar number 3 in the national presentations, as well as in the presentations of the findings of the report on formalization in BRICS countries and report on the integrated strategies for the transition to formality in selected CIS countries. You can always come back to the recording of this webinar 3 to refresh those details. BRICS labor and employment ministers also expressed great concern about the pandemic's negative effects leading to unemployment, decent work deficits, and inequality. They stated their strong determination to recover with stronger national economies, inclusive labor markets, and social protection systems in the declaration and its recommendations issued at the end of the Ministers' Summit this July, and we will hear about it more today. Having said that, we cannot underestimate the importance of the CIS-BRICS exchange on the level of the governments, social partners, academia, and other key stakeholders. And this series of webinars, it is a response to an increased ILO member countries' requests and expectations from capacity building initiatives that are tailored to their respective contexts and complement their expertise. Throughout this series of webinars, we will continue working on the CIS BRICS recommendations and plan of actions to see what and how we can do further together. Also, please remember about an eCampus page where you can access the resources, presentations, videos, reports, everything, all the learning modules that are being presented during this series. And without taking more time, I would like to thank you and say that we will see each other more during the group work today. And over to you, Snehal. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Julia. That is an excellent summary, and I'm glad that we are recording it because we would all be able to go back and listen to that excellent summary that you provided, so that we are able to therefore also remind ourselves to bring us, each of us, up to speed. I'm just taking the liberty to post the eCampus page link here for everyone's easy reference. in the chat box. You should all be able to you should all be able to access with your password that has been sent to you. Great. Thank you once again, Julia, for that excellent summary. Without much ado, I want to therefore then move ourselves on. I take the liberty of being the facilitator and changing the sequence a little bit, and I hope Elena would not mind. So Elena, if I may invite you to take the floor to tell us a little bit about the key aspects of the BRICS LEM meeting first, and then we go to Professor Santosh's paper. So Elena, is that okay? I invite you now to make the presentation. Excellent. I can already see your screen. Thank you for your flexibility. I stop here and I pass on the floor to you, Elena, colleagues, Elena Zotova.
Thank you for giving me the floor.
We've lost your. We
So,
can hear you, but we have lost your. Okay, we have your screen again. Thank you. We can hear you and we can see your screen.
Thank you for giving me the floor. And I would also like to start with thanks to the organizers of the seminar for the invitations and possibility to participate in this very substantive and interesting discussion which is going now. I was asked to speak, to make the presentation in Russian, so I will shift into Russian and and I will start. Извините, я начну с того, что
I will start with repeating that the informal economy in the world is not a characteristic particular of a country. It is present in all the countries of the world. And we see here that the developed countries as well as less developed countries are involved in the issue of informal economy, and they have to formalize their labor market. Yulia already mentioned that the Ilo estimates that nearly 2 billion of people are employed in informal economy, and 8 of 10 economic subjects are employed in informal economy. It's a huge problem. In BRICS and CIS countries, the informal economy is present, and its formalization, the formalization of the labor market differs between the markets. On the left, you can see the informally employed workers' share in BRICS countries. This is from the Ilo database. And on the right, you see the situation in CIS countries. Here, not all the CIS countries are present, but only the countries that provide the statistical data to the CIS Statistical Committee. We see that in all the countries listed here, the informal economy challenge is present and should be tackled. The international community monitors this issue and sets the goals to formalize the labor market. The Sustainable Development Goals adopted in 2015 comprised the goal 8, to promote the decent work and the formalization of the labor market. We should say that before, the decent work was not mentioned. This means that the attention towards the formalization is growing. And if we look at the recent years, it is evident. The international documents that reflect the concern of the countries about this issue cover the Sustainable Development Goals and the Ilo Convention 204 that urges the countries to formalize their labor market. During the last seminar, we spoke about the necessity to formalize the economy, and we also heard that the informal economy is a kind of safety cushion, safety pillow that gives the chance to some workers to find work. Yes, this opinion exists, but still, the majority of the countries agree that their security should be guaranteed by the social protection, and the informal economy damages this social protection system. The main objective is to formalize the informal economy. Now let's speak about the BRICS countries. The first interaction about the labor relations took place in 2015, and in 2016 in Ufa, the first meeting of the labor ministers was held, and the main issue was the formalization of the labor markets. This issue was one of the priorities. The Russian Federation organized this first meeting and invited many experts, scientists, and we heard that the countries are different, their labor markets are different, and the labor market is nationally oriented. But the formalization issue was a common problem, even if we see that the informal economy is different in the countries, but it is present in all the countries, and all the countries try to decrease its level. In 2018, the labor ministers of BRICS countries in Argentina adopted a declaration that underlined the formalization issue. Moreover, another document called Political Principles to Favor the Formalization of the Informal Labor was adopted, and this document was alleged to the declaration of the labor ministers in 2018. In 2021, in India, a virtual meeting was held, and this virtual ministerial meeting was focused on the formalization of labor markets as well. Here we see that the years 16, 18, 21, between these years, there are no blank spaces, because during these years not stated on the slide, the issues that the ministers discussed and the measures of cooperation, the actions to take in the countries were their kind of development for the formalization ideas. The ideas that were voiced during this year. So the formalization issue was always on the agenda of the labor ministers of BRICS countries, starting from 2016. Nearly in every declaration, this necessity to formalize the economy was underlined, and the recent development of this problem shows that the main measures proposed were to create new jobs in the formal economy, to invest in skills that give the workers the possibility to get these new jobs and to be competent there. The countries state the necessity to develop the infrastructure of the labor market, to develop the employment services in order to facilitate the interaction between the workers and the employers, to develop the labor inspections. And this issue was discussed especially during this year. It is important to strengthen the labor security and hygiene requirements and safety. This issue is highly important for the formalization of the economy. And here we're speaking not only about the cooperation with the companies, with business, but we're speaking about the work with people, with the population that should acquire this new labor culture, because sometimes there are conditions for safety work, but the population ignores them. So this is highly important, and BRICS countries discussed this question a lot. And if we want to make the formal economy attractive, that it is important to provide the rights for workers and the social coverage for all the workers involved in the formal and informal sector.
I'm sorry.
I cannot hear the sound anymore. Is
Some
there a
technical
problem?
problems.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I am fighting with my slides. Yeah. Также очень важным вопросом.
A very important subject matter, as ministers have pointed out, Minister of Labor and Employment in BRICS countries, is the classification of the status of employment, which is used for the policy in the labor market. Who are the workers? Who are the self-employed? On such definitions, much depends for what concerns the social protection and the workers' rights as well. At the first webinar, we're talking about it. Certainly, there are statistical definitions that are changing once in a while, used widely, but even those statistical definitions vary between the countries, and they differ from the framework definitions proposed by ILO. As for the definitions that could be used for the legislation purposes, they are completely absent. The countries recognize this problem and should work on it all together. And ILO could play an important role in this sense, in the solution of these problems, terminological problems. Social dialogue, as Yulia told us, and as we all understand, in the resolution of the questions of labor and formalization is very important. We should say that there is a problem to which extent this social dialogue could be developed and how it should be developed, in what direction, considering the individualization of the work relations is rather difficult because there are new forms of employments on the way. It is very difficult to cover them with the collective agreements because there is no way. There is a transborder platform forms of employment were pretty new. This remains a big issue, and certainly these countries should cope with them. The regulation of these matters is of paramount importance. In 2021, during the Indian Summit of Ministers of Labor and Employment, the questions of formalization was understood via the digital technologies. On one hand, they discussed to which extent digital technologies can promote the formalization. How can they help to register the workers, the enterprises, the payment of the taxes, some accountancy, salary payments, on one hand. On the other, we were talking about the fact that these matters in practically in all countries are not regulated enough, and so need more attention. There were proposals. The Institute of Labor of BRICS countries proposed to pay much attention to the development of new digital technologies and to understand how they impinge upon the formalization. This work should start soon, and the role of ILO, of the experts of ILO, certainly of much importance. BRICS countries, as you see, well, all the points of our agenda needs a separate webinar because it's such a rich topic. We are just rushing ahead, but we should say anyway that in CIS, the formalization is of much importance. Last webinar, there were interventions of importance. The strategy until 2030 for the economic development of CIS, which was adopted lately, doesn't contain the term formalization. but is aimed at formalizing economy in CIS countries as a whole and in each member of CIS community. As for the labor markets, the strategy provides for the creations of a unified labor market and the resolution of questions of mutual labor migration to rationalize this process, which is very important as well for the formalization of the labor market. I had to talk about BRICS, but I cannot stop talking about CIS because Russia is both member of BRICS and CIS. And it is at the crossroads that we understand it's important to mention also the strategy of CIS, who, as BRICS countries, is very interested in formalization of the labor markets, which is confirmed in the previous webinar. As for Indian presidency and those propositions that were discussed, certainly all BRICS countries consider that it is necessary to go ahead in all trade direction. It is very difficult to see one breakthrough direction in formalization because it is a complex program, complex topic. And so we must face all components because the breakthrough in one direction perhaps will be stopped by the slow motion in other directions. So here, more than anywhere else, it is very important to involve all members of the whole government approach should be needed, or members of the government should be employed. It is very important to coordinate activities of various actors, the government, the social partners, and in all declarations of the Ministry of Labor and Employment and on the further documents and discussions, it is mentioned. As I told you before, it is important to work on the definition, on terminology that could be used in the national legislations. Another important matter is monitoring. As you have seen on the graphs, some countries present statistical data, others are kept back or underrepresented. In order to understand the situation, the real situation on the ground, it is very useful to have the evaluation, not only by experts, but by monitoring on the basis of statistical data. So the questions of evaluation and monitoring remain of top importance. Now in the far future, their importance will not fail. Another important point. We should share experience. During the meeting of the ministers in 2021, there was a talk about the big experience accumulated up to this point, because different countries have made many useful things, and they should exchange the best experience, best practices. The formalization of labor market is certainly a very vast matter. It's not only formalization. BRICS discuss the possibility to sign the agreement on social protection. There are examples of different such agreements in other regions. It's a difficult, long process, but the BRICS countries think about bilateral agreement. Perhaps it will go ahead, and we hope so. What will be the advantage of such agreement? What will be the result? Is the big interest on behalf of the workers to participate in the formal economy, because via this participation, they will get guaranteed social protection, the retirement schemes, which is a very important step of the Minister of Labor Employment in BRICS countries in a just direction, which is not related to formalization directly, but are important factors that will promote formalization. There are many such initiatives. The education development, the VAT schooling. It was a very hot topic lately during the Chinese presidency of BRICS, the questions of social protection, which is at the center of South African presidency, the OSH matters. These are all interrelated matters, and there are many interesting proposals for their solution. It is important to see them as a whole. Everything should be analyzed separately and then summed together. In this sense, the sharing of experience and webinars as ours is very important. And the participation in such initiatives not only give extra data for the experts and for the people who take political decisions, but also permit to see the positions of other countries, the best practices on the matters that are of importance for all of us. Well, I think that is enough. Thank you for your attention. I wanted to thank the organizers for the excellent opportunity to present and for this wonderful webinar. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Elena. That was Elena Zotova, who is senior researcher of science, PhD in economics, as well as a permanent member of the Russian delegation to the G20 Working Group on Employment, and has a wide national and international experience, as you can already know from her excellent presentation. Now I move the event, the webinar series on. I invite Professor Santosh Mehrotra, who is a visiting professor for the Center for Development Studies, University of Bath, to present who actually wrote the paper on formalization and which was titled Informality and the Potential for South-South Cooperation between BRICS. But today, he is invited to speak only about the recommendations that he made in that paper. So, Professor Mehrotra, good to see you once again. This is the floor is yours, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Okay, can you hear me? Thank you very much.
Very clearly, Santoshji, and we can also see your screen. Go right ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to go into slideshow immediately and turn to the recommendations, because many of the findings I had spoken about last time. And there you are. So you can see my screen, right? You
I
can see-
confirm we can see your screen, Santosh.
Okay,
Go,
great.
go right ahead.
So I think everyone in this group is aware that ILO has a recommendation 204 of about 6 or 7 years ago. And I'm going to speak a great deal about that. And there are many recommendations that emerge for formalization, in respect of formalization, and some good practices in that regard, which in a sense derive, which are in accordance with ILO recommendations. So what are the ILO recommendations? The first thing I think we need to recognize is that the ILO recommendation adopts a very holistic approach. It has 6 dimensions which focus on institutions. And the reason why I mention institutions is that in my last presentation about 2 weeks ago, I had been speaking about 2 different approaches and the 2 different types of reasons that emerge across the globe as to why informality emerges and why it persists. One is the nature of growth and the pattern of growth. And I discussed that last time, and this time I'm going to be talking about institutions. And institutions is the second reason why it emerges and there are problems with institutions. But here my approach is not sort of to begin to understand what the problems are. I think we've done with those. I'm going to be focusing on the recommendations. So what does ILO recommendation 4 say? It suggests a policy framework with 3 objectives for transition to formality. One is, to promote formal business and employment generation in the formal sector. The second is to facilitate the transition from informality to the formal economy. And the third is to have policies in place for preventing informalization of formal jobs. So the focus here in this presentation particularly is on the potential for triggers which make for the transition to formality. In other words, the focus is mainly on facilitating the transition from informal to the formal economy, because in my last presentation I'd spoken about how more formal businesses can be created and how policies can be adopted for preventing informalization. So moving on, what are the 6 main approaches adopted in ILO recommendation 204, which I will now henceforth call only 204. One is reform business and the ability of firms to enter. In other words, business entry reform. Second is simplified tax and contributions assessment and payments regime. The third is access to public procurement. The fourth is access to inclusive financial services. The fifth is access to entrepreneurship training, skills development, and tailored business development services. And finally, access to social security coverage. Now, this is a broad agenda. I'll give you 1 or 2 good examples of good practice in each of these, but spend a fair bit of time speaking about the last one, the 6th one, which is access to social security coverage. Okay, so moving on. What are the kinds of actions that we find across the globe which are in accordance with R204, which have been taken so far? Well, first,
Professor Mehrotra, have you moved to slide number 14 already?
Yes, but that's okay, because
I'm not able to see it. We are not able to see your next slide though. Huh?
I'm still showing as though it's sharing.
Maybe you might want to, now you are okay. Good. Now you're good.
Yeah.
We are on slide 14 now.
Yeah. Okay. Thank God.
No worries. Please go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you.
I could see. Okay.
Just because I have interrupted you, if I may seek your indulgence for 30 seconds, just to remind all participants a message that Anita has posted in the chat box to please rename yourself as on the basis of the language that you are participating in, because the next stage would be to break into groups. So for example, I have changed my name from Snehal to Snehal English. So if you are in the Chinese group, then please add the word Chinese, and if you're in the Russian group, please add the word Russian so that my colleague Ariana knows how to separate you into groups. Sorry, Professor Mehrotra, back to you.
No problem. I want to go to slideshow again. Let me try if slideshow spoils our fun. I hope not. Can you still see me?
I can still see your slide 14.
Yes, that's not my intention.
But it's not on slideshow mode, but you know, don't worry about it. Just it's fine. We can see it well.
You can see it well, right?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. Now, what are the actions in accordance with R204 which have generally been taken in the country? A general challenge in all countries, including in BRICS, is that R204 is a relatively new agreement of 2014, and there is little information or less information or recognition within countries of the implications of this. ILO reports that comprehensive diagnoses of the informal economy at large are being undertaken in Brazil, Nepal, South Africa, Swaziland, and Vietnam, and national action plans or roadmaps are being formulated with ILO support, including the roadmap to tackle undeclared work in Greece, in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, and a formalization strategy in Zimbabwe. But in Latin America in particular, strategies have been pursued for some time based on multiple interventions, for example, in Argentina and Brazil, and it is expected that at least 10 countries across Latin America will champion the development and implementation of integrated policy frameworks over 2016 to 2021 period in accordance with R204. So in many ways, the Latin American region has been most advanced in respect of these types of R204 actions. So what about the specific areas that I mentioned at the beginning? Business entry reforms and tax reform. I want to give you some examples where these have tended to show good results in terms of encouraging formality among informal firms. There is the very briefly talk about incentives for formalization of workers. Now, one thing, for instance, that the Indian government has been encouraging is formalization through incentives. Historically, you see, the Indian formal sector, organized sector, has firms which are required to register for the Employees Provident Fund. Trouble is, quite often firms try to evade registering for it because it requires both employers and employees to make a contribution towards this fund, which provides for old age pension, death and disability insurance, etc. Now, this evasion is possible in many ways, but I won't go into that. But in order to minimize evasion, the government has a scheme. The evasion of Employees Provident Fund by employers is widespread, given the poor enforcement of labor laws. So the current government, in its efforts to formalize employment, has incentivized employers to enroll workers under the EPF by offering to make employers' contributions to the Social Security scheme for 3 years for new workers, thus boosting enrollment. So we found actually that in recent years, there's been some improvement, you know, not a huge improvement, but certainly some improvement. There's another reform in respect of sort of taxes, which I want to highlight, which is again happens to be from India. I assure you, there aren't any, I don't think there are many other examples of India following this. There are many examples from other parts of the world as well. You know, one national reform that was carried out was a goods and services tax. Now, India is a large country, a federal country, and in the past, till about 4 years ago, there were state level value-added taxes, VAT taxes. And those tended to vary from one state to another. And in order to reform that system, the country, the national parliament legislated a national goods and services tax, and that state level VAT was done away with. And there are about 17 other taxes were all merged into this national goods and services tax. Now, it's interesting that we find that this has increased the number of unique indirect taxpayers in as compared to the previous system, and the payers into the indirect tax system has increased very hugely because people have found it, small firms which were earlier informal, have found it worth their while to actually register for GST. Now you can well turn around and say, well, just registering for a tax, to pay tax is not the whole thing about formalization, but it is certainly one very important way in which firms try and remain informal by not paying taxes. So, you know, the GST's design is such that they found it useful in their own interest to actually register themselves. So there was a massive increase within 6 months of the number of registrants, a substantial, 3.4 million new firms registered. And since then, over 2018, 19, 20, and 21, the numbers have only increased. So by March 2021, the normal taxpayers had grown from 6.4 million to 10.9 million, and so on. So there's been a massive increase of tax revenue on this. One benefit of this GST was voluntary compliance, which it elicited. In other words, about 1.7 million registrants who were below the threshold of rupees 2 million turnover per annum, and hence were not obliged to register. They actually chose to do so. And because they chose to do so, the number of taxpayers increased. So total 71 million non-farm enterprises, about 13% or even more, actually more like 20% are now registered for GST.
Santoshji, I have to interrupt you once again. Your slide is frozen again. What you might want to do is, Santoshji, if you see at the bottom of the screen, you see right where it says 76%. If you want to click the icon right on the left, that might sort of solve the problem. Where it says 76% on your screen at the bottom.
Oh, I need to go back. Give me a second. Oh, shoot. It's frozen.
Sorry, because you are referring to the slide and I think people are not able to see it. So.
Okay. You know what? I think I'm going to go out of this slideshow and give me a second. Bear with me.
No worries.
Can you see this now?
You are on slide 15, the slide that you are referring to.
Correct.
And we're just about finishing, and you talked about the 71 million non-farm enterprises that registered.
Correct. And now I'm going to remain sort of within this. I think slideshow is solid.
Yeah, exactly. So now we are able to see you're on slide 20.
I'll remain with this. I'll remain with in this format.
You're on slide 20 right now. Are recommended 204 measures to trigger formality. No.
So I've jumped far too ahead. Bear with me. So now,
perfect.
I'm on 16, right? So after this, I have only 9 more slides. So
that's all right. We are giving you about 12 more minutes. I hope that's okay.
I will finish within that.
Perfect. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Another R204 measure to trigger formality is public procurement. So let me speak about public procurement, which is, providing firms public procurement. In other words, giving them access to public procurement, which I think all of us know that governments are massive procurers of both goods and services from the private sector. Now, if we have some special provisions for informal firms or procuring from informal firms or small firms, then I think there would be this itself is also and has encouraged action. A fourth measure is encouraging financial inclusion. Now, here in this regard, I have some sort of data in respect of household accounts, but I don't have data, unfortunately, for business accounts, because honestly, if you're a sort of informal firm, the point is that your household account is not that different from a business account. That's the whole purpose, that you sort of, the ILO definition of an informal firm is one where the business is not separable in legal sense from the household's own personal account. So anyway, abstracting for that for a minute, look at the share of households that have bank accounts in the 5 BRICS countries, and the share seems to be actually very high. You look at 2017 data, that's the latest data, unfortunately, the World Bank gives access to, and it's in the region of 70 to 80%. But you know, financial inclusion on its own is not going to encourage formality on the one hand. On the other hand, without firms having a bank account, it's not really seriously possible to be formal. So clearly, I think what one is suggesting or reminding you about R204 is the need for taking all of these actions simultaneously. In other words, you can't just take action in the area of public procurement or in tax reform or in enabling business entry. You have to take action in every area, because although all the BRICS countries seem to have a very high share, 3/4 of all households seem to have a bank account, but the level of informality within the BRICS is extremely varying, extremely divergent, as I had shown in my last presentation 2 weeks ago. Moving on, another way of promoting formality is access to skills and business development services that states should provide. And in the context of BRICS, well, occupational skills fall under the initiatives for the education and training of workers and the dissemination of decent work agenda. So such initiatives have been gaining momentum in the BRICS, as seen in the BRICS declarations of Fortaleza and UFA, as well as in the discussions of the BRICS academies, which are the research academies. And there are many good practices in respect of skills in each of the BRICS countries, which my paper discusses. And ILO, in fact, Anita's division has actually done sterling work in this area, has tried to bring together at least the work related to recognition of prior learning in each of the 5 BRICS areas, so that learning takes place across the BRICS countries in respect of access to skills and business development services. E-governance is yet another recommendation that emerges from R204. And again, e-governance in labor and industry affairs is a good thing in its own right. So for instance, we have many examples from around the world in respect of labor inspection systems in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, e-payment of salaries in Philippines, e-wallets, which have been reducing transactions in India and Indonesia. But we need to re-emphasize that there's no really underlying theory of change why these will automatically reduce informality, which takes me back to the point that the theory of change to trigger formality essentially lies in the idea that there is a holistic approach which is inherent in R204, and that holistic approach needs to be followed. Individual actions around e-governance alone are not going to solve the problem. When you take each of those separate actions along each of those axes, the 6 axes, including e-governance, then things move along. Let me shift the sort of discourse or narrative to another question. What works better? Is it carrots? What does the government need to do? Offer carrots or impose the threat of a stick, which is better to trigger formality? And there's some evidence from the literature that sticks work better than the carrot. I mean, ease of doing business surveys was one way of was one carrot that was being offered. It was assumed that over the period 2003 to 12, that regulatory reforms in all the countries of the world will create more investment. Well, they might have brought more investment, but there's no evidence really to suggest that it led to greater formality. That raises again the question, how good are simply offering some sort of benefits of ease of doing business? Will that necessarily encourage formality? And the evidence seems to be the jury is out on the evidence. But let me give you some examples about how using a stick has worked. In Bangladesh, for instance, an impact evaluation tested a stick. What was the stick? Well, the test was that informal firms were paid a visit by tax officials by the National Tax Authority, which sent a letter requiring firms to register with the tax authority within a given time limit in Dhaka. Now, many firms that received the letter actually registered, but there was no effect on firms that did not receive the letter, although, of course, information spread even among them. So, secondly, what was also clear was that only larger firms registered. So governments may wish to focus their sticks particularly on larger firms, and that's a policy implication. Now, there's more evidence in this regard in a paper I did for the ILO, which is the Asia background paper for ILO's GEPR, the Global Employment Report of 2020. But let me quickly move on to this final 204 recommendation about social protection. And I'll spend the last 4 or 5 minutes of my time speaking about this before I turn to other recommendations. So look at the BRICS countries and what proportion of the population is covered by at least one type of social protection. The types of social protection are all mentioned to the right. Persons with disabilities, the unemployed, old age pension, etc. And you notice that again, in the BRICS countries, there's massive sort of variation in respect to the population share, which is covered by at least one area in social protection. So clearly, much action is needed. Now, there's much to be learned across countries in respect of social insurance, because this is by far the most important institution. If we ensure social insurance, meaning old age pension, death and disability insurance, and maternity benefits for all informal workers, in one sense, you've actually informalized all the workers, even though you may not have you may have formalized all the workers, although you may not have formalized all the enterprises. So this is a very important approach across the globe that could be or should be adopted. And I want to sort of give some examples from countries across. Social insurance, which is the defining feature of informality of workers, is not available to a significant share of the workforce in Brazil, India, and China. And over 20% of the Russian workforce and 1/3 of the South African workforce is still informal. And even where the social insurance exists, the social security system is currently very fragmented and the coverage is patchy. At the same time, all the BRICS are either aging or will be on the verge of aging in 10 to 15 years' time, which is sort of India. The remaining 4 countries among the BRICS are already aging. So this poses massive challenges to the BRICS countries, given that many in the population are without social insurance. What are the achievements in each of the BRICS countries, which I quickly go through? 3 more slides left, only including this one. One is child and family benefits based on non-contributory schemes are nearly universal in Brazil and Russia. They're also reaching a large part of the population in South Africa. 4 of the 5 BRICS provide employment injury protection to a large share of the workers. In Russia and Brazil, persons with severe disabilities have universal access to social protection. There's also very significant progress made in South Africa in respect of maternity coverage. China has achieved near universal pension coverage. Brazil has achieved close to universal coverage for pensions, and so on and so forth. In the interest of time, I'll move on quickly, finally, to my last two slides about recommendations. So this this slide is mainly about sort of what emerged from the BRICS Labor and Employment Ministers' declaration in July 2021. It focuses on 4 pillars of labor and employment policy. In other words, promoting social security agreements among the BRICS, formalization, women's labor force participation, and gig and platform economy in the labor market. They committed to exchanging info for cross-border labor flows and initiate social service agreements, social security agreements for international migrant workers. There were similar other such agreements that were made. And finally, I'm just going to sort of go through many of the recommendations that emerge at the end of my paper, and I'll run through them quickly, Snehal, in the interest of time. One recommendation is, that the BRICS countries need to arrive at a consensus that informality is a serious enough issue to deserve greater attention in policy itself. This itself is in many ways would be an important achievement, because informality, we all know, is the source of and the symptom of inequality and poverty. Secondly, it leads to poor productivity and inefficiency in the economy. And thirdly, it leads to severe public finance constraints, as I was talking earlier about, how including firms in the tax net is extremely important. Recommendation 2, well, BRICS should undertake an assessment and diagnostics of informality in their country and agree to set up a technical group for mutual learning and support in this regard. The recommendation 3 is BRICS countries should review and enforce national laws and regulations or other measures to ensure appropriate coverage and protection of all categories of workers and economic. And ILO could undertake to work with the BRICS governments to study the national laws and regulations in each country. Recommendation 4, well, BRICS could adopt an integrated policy framework, which is what I've been speaking about, to facilitate the transition in the three types of goals. And finally, BRICS could respond to the need to respond together to the economic effects of COVID-19, because by helping each other expand their social insurance systems. Recommendation 5, BRICS should undertake a systematic review in their own country on COVID-related measures and how well they supported informal enterprises and workers, because we know that informal enterprises and workers were the worst affected, and they were the most vulnerable to the effects of COVID and the lockdowns that resulted from COVID. And finally, and this is my last point, ILO should be preparing a program, perhaps with funding from the BRICS together, that supports such activities in each of the BRICS. The collaboration between India, Brazil, and South Africa and the ILO in the promotion of decent work agenda has shown positive results, and that can be scaled up. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Professor Mehrotra. And while your presentation is always very interesting, what I also remember is your assertion that the stick works better than the carrot, and therefore that sort of reminds me to utilize it in the next phase, in the next section, which is primarily around the group work, where we are going to be very, very strict with time. But before that, Anita has reminded me to open the floor for any burning questions that people have to the two presentations that are made. And I'm going to use a stick approach, and I'm actually going to stick to only 2 questions, no more. So if there are any questions, I would like to see any raise of hands. In the meanwhile, while people are thinking about it, I would request all of you, most of you have changed your names to indicate the language. I also use this opportunity while people are still thinking of questions, if any, and the time has already started, to ask Ariana, my colleague, to already create the rooms, if not let move people to the rooms already. And Anita, I don't see any questions, Anita. What I would suggest, therefore, is that you go straight into I see a raised hand, and I go to the person, and it is from our colleague Chihuahua. Mr. Chihuahua, please go ahead. I see your Chuanhua. Can I please go ahead, ask your question, sir? Chuanhua, you're on mute.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I heard about the presentation of Mr. Elena, and we saw that in the recommendation of the LEMM, we should strengthen the formalization of informal economy. So what I'd like to know, if in G20 or G8, we have some standard of the concretization or implementation of formalization, should we have this kind of standard or criteria to know if we achieve some level of formalization?
Sneha, I see Ariana has already sent people to the rooms. So my suggestion would be that we go to the rooms and reply to the question in
yeah, I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
What I would suggest is that's an excellent question. Elena, if I may ask you to keep the question in mind, and Mr. Wu, if you will be patient and allow us to come back after the group work, and we will give the floor to Elena to quickly respond to your question. I hope that's okay with everybody. I am using my executive privilege as the facilitator to take that decision. Elena, please come back after the group work. But before we do that, Ariana, can you please disable the rooms, because there are still instructions that have to happen. So I will request Anita to please give us instructions. Anita, are you still there? Anita, I think, has moved to the rooms.
Anita has moved to the rooms.
Ariana, I will
Yes.
ask you to terminate the room straight away.
Yeah, I've closed the rooms,
I was
Snehal.
sent to the Chinese room. Unfortunately, I do not speak Chinese, so.
No, wait, we are closing the rooms. You are coming back to the plenary in
30 seconds more and the rooms close down. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So great. Anita, so let me take the opportunity of these 20 seconds that I have very quickly to say, Anita, could you please explain to us how we are going to, as soon as the rooms are closed and everyone is back, and then we will take people back to the rooms. So I would like you to explain to us
the exercise, yes.
in the
I think that would be good. Yeah.
And this is everyone is back now. Everyone is back in the plenary. Sorry, colleagues. Anita, floor to you. Please explain what we are going to do in the next 10 minutes.
Sneha,
how much time we have.
That was a great tour in the Chinese room. No problem.
Fantastic. Please go ahead.
Yes. So basically, we are going to do the same exercise we did in the second session. We didn't do an exercise last session. So if you recall, the groups were in recommendations. For example, English was in recommendations 1 and 2, and this is based a little bit on Santosh recommendations and the workshop recommendations, BRICS CIS, so kind of a merge of recommendations, the ones that the group considered more important. And now, for example, the English that was on 1 and 2 will be in 3 and 4. The Russian group that was in 5 and 6 will look into 1 and 2. And the Chinese group that was looking at recommendations 3 and 4 will look into 5 and 6. I think I'm not going to take too much time explaining Sneha, because our colleagues, Karina, Julia for Russian are prepared. I am there in the English with you and Duncan. And for Chinese, we know we have Yutong, and I think Yukun Zhu can probably help us as well. I'm just volunteering him to support. So we have enough kind of a mass critique. But the idea is that it's a bit like a world cafe, so everybody gets the chance to look into a different set of recommendations, look quickly into what is there, add what is missing from your perspective, and then select one rapporteur. And then we come back to the plenary, and we'll have 1 to 2 minutes each very quickly to go through the recommendations of the group, just like we did on webinar 2. So, and we have 10 minutes for that. So over to you now.
Okay, 10 minutes from now. So Ariana, please move us into the rooms. Thank you. See you back in 10 minutes. Thank you. See you back in 10 minutes.
Hi, Ariana. We were assigned to the wrong rooms, so not by language, like Russian, Chinese, and English was all together. I don't know if you're here, Ariana or Sneha. So if you can somehow reassign the Russian.
Hold on, I cannot be made.
Yeah. So Chinese and Russian and English were all together. Which is very nice, huh, Yuto?
Well, give me a chance to talk to you, Anita.
Yeah, that gives us a chance.
Yeah, I saw your comments on the SharePoint.
Sorry?
Appraisal.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so great. But I haven't received others' comments, Anita.
Yes, I think we have to push people, huh? We also have a final fact sheet for China, by the way. We have witnesses about our job, but anyway.
Yeah, Anita, maybe by Thursday, you can push them a little bit.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah.
Yes, because we need that approval from budget. Otherwise, we cannot.
Yeah.
I think everybody is in the wrong room, so no problem.
Hi, Anita, can you hear me?
Yes.
Anita, listen, I think there is an issue with today there is the breakout rooms are not working properly.
So can we do it in plenary?
I think let's go back to the plenary in deference to time. So I'm closing all the rooms and I will explain, okay?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, colleagues, I think everyone is back. Is everyone back? I can see people still coming in. Wait.
We were a little bit mixed now.
Yeah, no, we have had some trouble today with the breakout rooms. What was happening was that the assignment was not working today. So what that actually requires us to do is to actually sign out and restart Zoom, which would have meant that people would have
lost the connection. Yeah.
Anita,
I have a small suggestion.
I already have your hand raised. Go ahead, Anita, please.
Yeah, I would have a small suggestion. What we can do is go one by one the recommendations and get the feedback from participants and take advantage that we have the translation.
Okay.
Interpretation.
Okay, interpretation.
And I can type them in.
Yeah, maybe Anita, for that to work, what would happen is that people would still probably need to be in different. Okay, why don't we try and try with a couple of, like you're approach and we see. Go ahead, Anita,
We'll
go
do
ahead.
it in plenary. It will be a little bit more chaotic.
Sure, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Okay, so basically, let's start with recommendation 1. Let me.
Yeah, and you're asking what the ask is for people to for participants to look at the recommendation, at the specific actions that can be taken with reference to the recommendation 1,
Yes.
which people have already inputted into, and
Exactly.
see if there is if there are any inputs that they would need to provide, isn't it?
Yeah, so quickly, just the recommendation what text was built on existing academic capacity on BRICS and CIS institutions and encourage them to explore the issue of informal economy. There were a few recommendations that I'm not going to read out again, not to waste time.
Right.
Let's go here and then listen to any kind of additional comments on that, and we can type in.
Okay, so colleagues who have who are in the Russian and the Chinese channels, you already have the translated versions of these slides available in the chat box. So if you would prefer to look at them, please do not hesitate to go back and look at them as well.
Yeah, so maybe we hear some additional recommendations on this recommendation 1 regarding think tanks. If there's no additional recommendation, we can move to recommendation 2.
Maybe Anita, it might now I'm thinking maybe it might be difficult to sort of for us to sort of various people may or may not have read through, but let's use the time that we have to actually look at do a status check on what the recommendations, what are the specific action points that we have received so far.
Yes.
Because let us not forget that the very purpose of providing only 10 minutes was because that these slides are available through the week, and if there are inputs that people want to provide to these slides, they are able to provide not only through this plenary or through these breakout rooms, but they have access to these slides all the time. So I suggest, Anita, again, I am actually sort of volunteering you to sort of lead us through the recommendations that are there for the in English that we have, because interpretation is available so far. So
yeah, sure,
people will then have the opportunity to go back to it later on their own time.
If people have like a burning comment before there's
exactly
question and answer, I can add them manually.
Exactly.
So basically, some of the key recommendations was to allocate public funds for at least some research on BRICS CIS interactions, set up BRICS and CIS states interdisciplinary groups, health, economic partners, and set up partnerships between academic institutions between BRICS and CIS states. This was on 1. I'm having trouble moving this thing.
Are you moving? Yeah, you are in slide 2.
Then our recommendation, a continuation supports to these MOOCs, which are these big workshops on informal economy to strengthen knowledge exchange between BRICS and CIS. Research groups created, for example, on formalization, digitalization, close with cooperation with the ministries of labor, integrate South-South and triangular cooperation into the different programs on BRICS and CIS, and institutionalization of this relationship as well. So that is not only a one-off. Extend the coverage of social security, increase compliance, and extend the application of labor and social security regulation. Recommendation 2 was recommendation to the ILO, expand and intensify the work with BRICS and CIS countries and other developing states on awareness raising and applying provisions of Art 204. We saw this a lot with Santosh today. So some of the recommendations of the group: give ILO mandates to reach out to movements of informal economy for cooperation, develop training programs, launch the training programs for social partners, and work together with the creative sectors on awareness raising. So this was another recommendation. Recommendation 3 was on BRICS countries can help share data of those who are in the formal sector but remain informal, monitoring the situation in BRICS countries, formalization of informal workers, and strengthening social security. So some of the recommendations came strengthening the cooperation between BRICS and CIS on social security systems. BRICS countries can share experience on inclusive social dialogue. And this was a little bit what was done in the past webinars and today on the way. And strengthen cooperation in regard to labor inspectorates. Then recommendation 4 was BRICS and CIS countries can help sharing research data and knowledge networks on formalization of informal workers, sample survey on BRICS and CIS formalization, cooperation among research centers and institutions, a little bit of a repetition of what was on 1, but that's not necessarily. Recommendation 6, there's not much done here on the English version. Oh, did I skip 5?
You did.
Yes, okay. 5. Encourage the network of BRICS labor institutes to analyze the care economy in the context of the informal economy, its role in the formalization process, explore potential ways to support and promote formalization. And here was also this important element of gender that had been a bit missing from our discussion. So maybe I hope next session will bring it up. Care economy has several facets and should be multidisciplinary. Comprehensive analysis of care economy in CIS. Gender aspects should be mainstream. Gender stereotypes should be avoided. Care economy and contribution to transition. Public and private partnerships to increase their potential in care economy, and digital literacy and migrant labor rights. So that was a bit of a focus. And recommendation 6, and I think this one is the one that didn't have too much homework, at least from the English group side. BRICS governments and social partners could commit themselves, given how the issue of informal workers has come to the fore during the COVID-19 pandemic, to undertake review of what actions the government could take to encourage formalization. And this was coming from Santosh. So in a nutshell, these are the recommendations. I think maybe if people have like some, you can open for comments for the next 5 minutes. And then also there was this question from Mr. Changhua to Elena Zotova that he might have to repeat, I think, Santosh, because it was, Snehal, sorry, because we're moving rooms when he was.
Indeed. No, indeed. So, colleagues, once again, I apologize. There is still, we've just tried again. There is still some issue with relation to moving people into groups. I think what I'm going to try and do is, as Anita suggested, we are going to try and move the conversation over to having two things. Two things. If you have any specific comment on the recommendations themselves, but while you're thinking of them, I will ask Anita and Duncan to post the slides. I know they were posted earlier, but if you could post the Google slide links once again for the 3 languages so that people can easily refer to them. They are able to therefore then go there and provide inputs, if any. In the meanwhile, I asked Mr. Wu, who asked the question around informality to Miss Elena. So I would ask him to repeat the question, please, so that Miss Elena is able to respond. She is in the call. Mr. Wu, could you please repeat your question?
Okay, fine. We already wrote in the chat box in English.
Okay.
Since you have mentioned the G20 and the BRICS declarations on formalization, so I'd like to know whether there's any implementation measures or indicators, criteria for formalization purpose. How do we evaluate how much we've done? And that's it.
Okay, thank you. So,
excuse me, should I answer now or?
Miss Miss Elena, please go right ahead. Please go right ahead. What is the implementation agenda, or what is the implementation? What are the tools that are in place and in the G20 to deal with this issue?
in fact, it is a very interesting and very relevant question. And this is the question that the countries, both within the BRICS format and G20 format, are very often asking each other. And within the G20 format, we have the self-reporting mechanism, the self-reporting which covers the priorities of the countries and their own assessment of the progress towards their reaching their priority objectives. The self-reporting is annual, and every G20 country provides these self-reports on so-called national plans, national employment plans, on an annual basis. In these self-reports, countries provide their own assessment of their progress in details, provide details on what was being done, on what they are doing, and what they are planning to do on each and every topic, on each and every issue they would think important for their countries. And the template of this national employment plan, so-called, is includes all the areas: the job creation area, the social protection area, the measures undertaken in skills development, in labor activation. So this is currently the main tool for the countries to provide their estimates and their assessment of the progress towards the formalization of the labor markets and reducing of the inequalities, including the gender inequality and all other forms of inequalities in terms of incomes and access to services, etc., etc. There are also other ways to assess the progress, maybe more sophisticated ways using the econometric approaches and different statistical databases, but these are usually these assessments are made by the experts within the countries, and what we all see are the main results. We rely on the country's own assessments of the situation and of the progress. It was a very long discussion whether somebody from the outside could do any assessment, but the countries decided that their national priorities and national interests are best revealed by their national governments. So that's the situation right now. Although some countries are sometimes, in some cases, the assessment of the progress made by the countries is summarized by the international organizations, for example, by the Ilo, by the OECD and other countries. For the BRICS countries, it's mainly the Ilo. So, but the international organizations are providing the summaries. The initial information, the initial assessment is made by the countries. I don't know whether I've answered your question or not.
Thank you, Elena. I think that's a good answer at least. And later you can also be in touch with each other. You can share your emails, I think, in the chat. And
absolutely.
Also the forum. So Sneho, I think I have to step out for 1 minute. So I'm just here co-moderating. I would suggest if you have any now comments on also, of course, Stantosh presentation and also on the recommendations, because some of the recommendations are stemming from the work on his presentation. So if anybody has any comments, please raise your hand. I see Sneha is back, and let us know if you have additional comments. I think we have until 12:45 to have some views on this. I'll be capturing them. So if any one of you from the Russian group, from the Chinese group, or from the English speaking group, I see from Portuguese speaking group, it's only me today.
And Ramiro.
Ramiro is Spanish speaking.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. I don't see any hands, and I just wanted to quickly say, well, Elena, Ms. Sotova, Mr. Wu says your answer is great, and as also just to remind you, you also have the opportunity to have a discussion on the eCampus page. There is a forum that is there. You could also potentially ask questions, have discussions there as well, this is a forum link is visible on the landing page of the eCampus platform itself. And just to remind you once again, I know this is something that I have said earlier, but please do remember that these particular webinars are designed and the group works are designed not to be the only for that matter, the main place where you are able to provide inputs, but these are also designed as the ones where we are able to have more of a discussion on inputs that are already provided. So please do not hesitate to provide your inputs there as well. I know Anita and Duncan have already posted the links of the slides once again just before that. Anita, 2 more minutes, so the final word to you.
Yeah, no, I have actually a question for Professor Santosh, and then you can say the final word.
Please.
I have taking advantage that nobody asked him a question, and I have a question. So, Professor, your interventions from the BRICS Knowledge Series and your first intervention now in the BRICS CIS series were extremely helpful for us to, have already these recommendations from the participants, and start this dialogue, which is unique. I don't know if we had too many BRICS CIS dialogues in the ILO. I at least don't recall any. I'm sure there might be 1 or 2, but this seems quite unique. So what would be your recommendation in terms of integrating your the findings that you have into this BRICS CIS series, the current one, but also in future ones? What would be your recommendation so that we can finally make it a reality and not just on paper? You have to unmute, I think, Professor.
Forgive me. It's not something that I've thought about, but at the same time, let me react from my knowledge, which is slightly dated, of the CIS countries, or most of which I've actually been to in my earlier avatar in the UN system. You see, many of the non-Russia CIS countries are at a very different level of development. I mean, I'm thinking of the non-European the Asian CIS countries are more akin to many of the emerging market economies and the developing countries of the world. So, in other words, what would be useful is if there was some sort of examination in the Asian, Central Asian, particularly CIS countries, of what actions have been taken on the one hand in the upper middle income countries of Latin America, including Brazil, including the monotributo, and also many of the Southeast Asian countries, because of the comparability in the level of development. While on the other hand, for the European CIS countries, I would say, look more at comparable examples of similar structures in the economy in Europe. So because, and I say this with a certain amount of confidence in the fact that when I was writing the BRICS paper, what I was struggling with all the time was the enormous variation within the BRICS itself, the enormous difference in the level of per capita income, and hence the structure of the economy and so on. So it's very important to look at comparable countries. I think that's the message that I'm trying to give you from within CIS, rather than look across the globe.
Thank you very much. I do not have really particular closing words because I think those are good closing words for all of us. But I would encourage you, as Sneha has mentioned, to work on the Google Slides. I know in China it might be a little bit more difficult to work with the Google Slides, but then you can actually, I think Yutan can maybe send us any comments or anything that you would have. We can convert that to PowerPoint and send it to you. I think I've done that in the platform. So, and then you can send to us in writing, or through the forum, your ideas, because
the platform.
I have shared it in the forum. Yeah. So over to you, Sneha.
Yeah, no, on eCampus. So just to remind everyone, while the Google Slides may not be accessible, this particular site that I am now posting is accessible, and all of you do have access to it. And therefore, any questions, any comments that you may have would be available here. I have just posted it to everybody. So please do go back to us. Thank you once again. Apologies for the technical issue. I am having to look at it. Hopefully we will not have that on the next webinar that which will take place on the 30th of November, which is next Tuesday, same time, in your own time zones. We will be super excited to actually in the next webinar welcome which is going to be focused on China-Brazil perspective. So what lessons can be learned with CIS and BRICS? So we will have a presentation from ISA, Mr. Yukun Zhu, on social protection and informality. Some of the stuff that was mentioned today by Professor Mehrotra and Elena. Mr. Yutong Liu, who is also here today in this call and has been in each of the three webinars just preceded today, talk about the work that China-funded projects on skills in ASEAN is doing on the issue of informality. We will have João Bosco, President of Brazil Africa Institute, providing us with the Brazilian experience, and then we will hopefully have group work with proper rooms assigned. Thank you once again. Thanks to the two presenters, Elena and Professor Mehrotra, for the keynote presentation, and Julia also for doing us the summary. And all of you for your patience, to the interpreters who made it possible for us to have this conversation today, and my colleagues as well. Look forward to seeing you on the 30th. The presentation recordings will be available on southsouthpoint.net by the end of today, as well as on the platform. Thank you once again. Updated agenda for the webinar is available here. Plus also it was sent to everybody this morning, yesterday evening by Ariana. So you will receive the same reminder next Monday. Thank you once again. Warm regards, greetings, bye-bye, and have a good rest of the day wherever you are. Thank you once again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.